Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn, a game originally released all the way back in 2013, is the game that not only managed to overshadow the disastrous launch of the original Final Fantasy XIV, before it was erased from the annals of history, but also the game that now stands as the foundation for the overwhelming sensation Final Fantasy XIV has ultimately become. But is A Realm Reborn still worthy of all the praise it got for reviving a title seemingly destined to fail and bringing the world of Eorzea back from the brink of oblivion? Or is it just a slog fest, a rite of passage if you will, that new players are required to trod through before getting to the good stuff? Hello everyone, I'm Nökvi from Birds of Play, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at how Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn holds up in the year 2021. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing to the channel, becoming a part of our growing Final Fantasy family. But without further ado, let's get on with their review. For the uninitiated, Final Fantasy XIV is, as the name implies, the 14th installment in the Final Fantasy series, not counting sequels and spin-offs, and the second MMORPG, the first one being Final Fantasy XI, which still sports an active player base almost 2 decades after its release. Just like with other Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy XIV is a standalone title, meaning you don't have to have played any of the other ones to get what's going on. That being said, Final Fantasy XIV is loaded with references to other Final Fantasy titles for fans to take note of and enjoy. These references include, but are not limited to, Magitech armor from Final Fantasy VI, Gunblades from Final Fantasy VIII, Judge armor from Final Fantasy XII, what's with all the armor, and lots of chocobos. As further evidence of the game being a melting pot of bits and pieces from the archives of the series, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the original creator of Final Fantasy, recently joined the ranks of Final Fantasy XIV players and has ever since been rushing through the game at record speed, sharing some of his favorite homages along the way over on his Twitter page. But even if you aren't familiar with the franchise's storied legacy, and even if the name Hironobu Sakaguchi effectively means nothing to you, entering the world of Final Fantasy XIV is an invitation to step into a virtual monument to the franchise's long history that started all the way back in 1987. Which makes for a great spectacle, even if you choose just to take it all at face value. So you don't need to be a Final Fantasy fan to enjoy Final Fantasy XIV, but it sure doesn't hurt. Some might say that as an MMORPG, Final Fantasy XIV seems strangely preoccupied with its story, but the story has more often than not been one of the main selling points of Final Fantasy games, and even though A Realm Reborn doesn't quite reach the heights of some of the game's later expansions, or just other entries in the series in general, the story is perfectly serviceable. That being said, world building is where the game really shines, at least if you're willing to pay attention to what the game is telling you. As an MMORPG, Final Fantasy XIV is somewhat limited in regard to its cinematography, and only scenes deemed important enough actually feature voice acting. In practice, this means that the vast majority of information in the game is delivered through writing, which is often quite tempting to skip, because at least some of the time it does feel unnecessarily padded, making you wonder whether the same information couldn't have been conveyed in fewer words. Thankfully, most of the writing is atmospheric, and even small characters often have a great deal of unique flourish to their language, but sometimes you can have too much of a good thing. However, if you are in a hurry to catch up, instead of skipping dialogue, I recommend you take advantage of the changes that have been implemented in A Realm Reborn to make your journey through Eorzea a lot smoother, because if you take the world building seriously, you are sure to be rewarded down the line in later expansions. For example, you might mistake your brief interactions with the people of Ishgard for empty filler, but a lot of it actually prepares you for what's to come in Heavensward, the first expansion to the game. And the same is true for a lot of other seemingly inconsequential dialogue that sets the stage for future expansions. A lot has changed since A Realm Reborn was originally released, making for a much smoother journey through the main scenario. New players aren't likely to notice, but some quests have been altered, while others have been completely removed, letting players spend less time running back and forth and more time experiencing the story, battling enemies, and exploring Eorzea. You know, the fun stuff. Don't get me wrong, there's still quite a bit of back and forth, but you take what you can get. One of the biggest differences a returning player might notice is the speed at which you level up your character, making it unnecessary to grind for levels just to get through the story. To be precise, I made it up to level 48 out of 50 just by doing the main scenario quests, and the occasional fate, which are these short scenarios that take place out in the field. One might suspect that all this rushing could devalue what A Realm Reborn has to offer, and there is some truth to that, but all things considered, these changes probably reflect the best course of action the developers could have taken. After all, Final Fantasy XIV isn't just A Realm Reborn anymore, so it's nice for new players to at least have the option to rush the realm. It also allows players to get access to more skills earlier on, making the combat more engaging than it would be otherwise. For those who want to take their time, however, the job system does present ample opportunity to slow things down a bit, since players are effectively able to take on every single class in the game with a single character. In addition to being a great callback to the job system in older Final Fantasy titles, the job system in Final Fantasy XIV put a great spin on the classic MMORPG formula and dispels the need for juggling multiple characters if you want to experience everything the game has to offer. If you're on the fence about the game due to it being an MMORPG, you might be comforted to know the game allows for a variety of different playstyles. So even if you're not interested in the social aspect of the game, you can still enjoy what it has to offer. The only time you will be required to play with others is when you tackle dungeons or undertake trials, but even then the social aspect can usually be ignored. That being said, the community in Final Fantasy XIV has a well-earned reputation for being very welcoming and supportive if you do choose to engage. And in my experience, it's fun to at least say hi or lally ho at the start of a dungeon, or to encourage the party when something goes wrong. A part of the feel-good nature of Final Fantasy XIV is no doubt thanks to the developers as well, since people such as Naoki Yoshida, aka Yoshi P, the director of the game, have been nothing but class acts when discussing the game. As someone who is sort of inherently turned off by the notion of MMORPGs, and as a long-time Final Fantasy fan, I can honestly say I was pleasantly surprised to find Final Fantasy XIV to be a game worthy of the Final Fantasy name. With all the praise I have for the game, there are nevertheless aspects of it that I feel undermine the experience. The biggest offender for me personally is the often uninspired cinematography that fails to evoke the dramatic effect the scene might otherwise elicit. This is a bit of a shame because when the game does mean business, such as in the opening cinematic, or on the rare occasion it pulls out all the stops with the in-game graphics, it has proven itself to be not only dramatically compelling, but also visually stunning. Another nitpick I have is that often the game will stick a cutscene right before a boss fight in a dungeon or a trial, making you feel a bit guilty for making other players wait, thereby lessening your own enjoyment of the scene in question. When all is said and done, however, A Realm Reborn is a good start to a great game. So whether you want to take your time or just get through it as quickly as possible, the game has got you covered. And while the presentation of the story might suffer slightly on account of the game being an MMORPG, it more than makes up for it with the sheer scope of the world that's on display. Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn might best be described as the promise of greater things to come, but don't forget to stop and smell the roses while you're there. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked the video. This review is based on my second playthrough of A Realm Reborn, and next I'm moving on to Heavensward. If you're interested in following my adventures in the world of Final Fantasy XIV, you can come check out our Twitch channel. I'll leave a link in the description. In case you're wondering, this is the amount of facial hair it takes to beat A Realm Reborn. So if you like watching facial hair grow in real time, check us out on Twitch. But now it's time to say goodbye. Until next time, caw-caw!